how about both of you just introduce yourselves?
I suck at this. Okay. I am Miguel Bulto. I exist. I don't know. I'm from Portugal.
You're omnipotent.
No. I am from Portugal. I was born in Portugal. I live in Portugal. And I am a musician. I'm a composer, and I believe that is it. I don't know if you want more or less detail.
Let's see, when were you born? And just go from there. Just give life story right now. Go.
Okay.
You have 2 paragraphs.
You know, you can write a book with 1 paragraph. You know that, right?
Yes.
Okay. 1989, April 13th. A stormy Thursday. I was born. And then I kept on living. I don't know, I had a normal upbringing, I guess. I went to school and everything, and I realized that I liked music. I was 11 years old. I was actually forced to take piano lessons because I was lazy. My mother noticed that I actually did have interest in the piano, but I was too lazy to actually do anything with it. So in the good French spirit, she's French, that's where my last name comes. Well, it's not actually my last name. Spoilers! The name Bruto comes from my mother, and she forced me to get piano lessons, and I eventually realized that it would be a great tool for composition. But I never intended to become a pianist. I'm not a pianist, technically. I actually lack a lot of technique. But I use it to compose. And then later on, I was like, what, 19? A friend of mine... Because most of what I do, I learned after some piano lessons. I learned composition by myself. Some books were recommended to me by a piano teacher who understood that I wanted to compose. So he gave me Walter Piston's manual on harmony, and I got Berlioz's treatise on instrumentation and orchestration. I just studied a bit for myself. I tried. Someone told me that you could make music with computers. I had no idea. And then I got Finale, I started experimenting, and things lead to things, and there you go. And eventually, someone told me that I should go to the academy in Lisbon, which I did very late, so I zoomed past 8 years of theory in just 4, because I already knew a lot of stuff by myself. And I was just doing 2 years in 1 at a time. And that's where I met Miguel Jesus. And I was still in the academy when I started Majora, actually. I showed him my idea. He liked the idea. He had never played any Zelda. He's not a gamer at all. But he liked the idea very much. He plays the guitar. He composes. He sings in choirs. He's very good for writing for choir. He's been revising a lot of the choir writing in Majora. And I showed him the idea, and I said, well, this would be like over 3 hours long, you know. And he said, well, I'll just engrave it all for you, you know, do the actual final score work on paper. And I was like, dude, you're crazy. It's 3 hours and a half of music. That's like over 600 pages on A3 size. And he's like, whatever, I'll just do it. And now he's partially regretting that decision. But not really. He's been pretty cool, actually, to help us with everything. And he's also been helping us with the recordings and everything. So yeah, apart from that, here I am. That's what you know. That's what I think is relevant, really.
Okay, cool. And then, Liam, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, well, I'm from a fairly secluded enclave, an island nation that regularly catches fire, and tries to pretend that the rest of the world doesn't exist. So I'm a musician, principally a percussionist. I started out as a pianist. I started probably too late for it to be. Not so late that it was useless, but too late to be able to take it particularly seriously. And then I ended up falling into percussion through high school. I'd never entertained the ambition of being a professional musician. I didn't have the skill, and it's not a particularly lucrative career in any part of the world, unless you decide that you really don't care about taste. So I decided that I would be something even more soulless and degrading and would become a computer programmer. So after nursing that ambition, I ended up going to university, and I'm still in university. I'm studying a double degree at Monash in Australia, which is arts and information technology, which are two things that are not usually thought of as going together. I ended up finding the project. I have some background with. I'd been exposed to the Zelda Reorchestrated project when they were still around. I was never a part of the project per se, but I was a part of the community that surrounded it, and I sort of. I rather lovingly imitated their intent, their ethos of reorchestrating video game music. I did the same thing with Final Fantasy. I ran a site that reorchestrated music from the Final Fantasy series for a number of years, and that sort of caved in fairly categorically some years back. But as part of that, I was originally exposed to this opera when it was first published on Zelda Reorchestrated's forums. At that point, there wasn't much to see. There was possibly the first demo, which is the Mayor's Council Room Fugato, and it wasn't terribly elaborate. It wasn't much more noteworthy than many other projects that several people had put on at that time, and so I didn't think much of it for quite a number of years. And then, possibly 3-4 years later, I went to look at I just wanted to see where the project was by that point. And it had grown. It had absolutely ballooned. There were 4 more demos, and people were now talking about, well, at some point we're probably going to have to get Nintendo's approval. And where I came in was Miguel was no longer able to render demos. He was no longer able to sample himself. And so, having some experience of the like, I offered. Well, I have a working sampler. I have experience in sound programming. I'm willing to help you out, and so from there, we've sort of careened into a role that is rather more elaborate than sound programming. Lately, we've been doing everything from revising libretti and orchestration, and now discussing set design of all things. So it's rather snowballed from the humble ambitions it once had, but that impresses me. I think. Is that coherent enough for you?
Yes, very much.
I have a correction to make. You could not have possibly have heard of the come back to see the demo 4 or 3 years later, because you talked to me in 2013. And I started in 2011, at the end, in the last month of 2011.
Oh,
so it took like 1 year and a half, and it wasn't the Zelda Reorchestrated forums, because there are no such thing as ZREO forums. If
they have a sub-forum on Gemakai. They used to have their own forum on HTLOS previously.
Oh, it's Gemakai, okay.
Gemakai.
Okay, yes. It's Gemakai. Because I posted a lot of stuff about Majora in forums before I started putting stuff on YouTube. And out of the 21st forums I posted stuff in, one said, that's a stupid idea. And all the others were actually quite excited about it. So, okay, let's give this a go.
So how did that actually begin, though? Like the idea, the conception, how did that just pop into your mind and say, this is something I want to do, and then you went out and started to do it? Like, what was that first moment like? People
like to create myths about, ideas that pop out of nowhere, and you suddenly... That exists usually for small stuff, but I remember when I was starting to make music a long time ago, I was like 15 years old or something, or 16. I remember I was replaying Majora's Mask, and I think that it crossed my mind that adapting Majora's Mask to some sort of real-world musical work or whatever, would be interesting. But I never acted on it, thankfully, because I sucked back then. So that idea just stayed, floating around, and it just was kind of forgotten. Later, in 2011, I was replaying Zeldas for a friend of mine who really, really loved the series. She saw me play once, and then she realized she actually liked the series very much, and she wanted to see the other ones. So we played them, and we ended up with Majora's Mask. And at some point, the idea came back to me, and I discussed it with her. And it was the year 2011 was the year where Zelda reorchestrated, where Zelda Symphony Orchestra, 25th anniversary of Zelda, was playing around the world. So I was like, well, if they can do that, and if they started as an independent effort, why can't I do something of the kind? Why can't I just, grab Majora's Mask and try doing this? Because I started realizing now that I was older, that some things actually did fit very well into operatic aesthetic. Just some things had to be removed. In fact, the first person I discussed it with her, the removal of Link from the opera was her. I was walking her down to the bus station, and we were wondering, Link doesn't talk. I'm not gonna make him sing. I'm not gonna make him talk. It's out of the fucking question. So what happens? Does he just dance? Does he just around? Does he just? Do we kill him? What if he never came to Termina, And interestingly, Hyrule Historia came a month later or so, 2 months later, and they conveniently gave me a confirmation that the timeline actually separates, even if it's just, pressure from the gamers or whatever, from the fans. So therefore, technically, for the lovers of canon, this is not out of canon in the sense that when you're an adult in Ocarina of Time, Termina is gone. You never went to Termina. So there you have it. It's a perfectly valid place to put the opera in. So I was a bit reticent about the canon lovers, but even then, I just wanted to see how it would work on stage.
So speaking of canon and everything, what are some of the different canonical aspects of this that you're gonna throw out, or maybe add your own take on certain things? Like, how important, first of all, is having everything be canon to it, but then also what are you going to do for changes?
I think Liam might help me develop on that one.
It can't come before the interests of the medium. I think.
Yeah, I'll start saying one thing and then you can explain it better, because he's better with words than I am. There's a reason he's here to revise the libretto.
Yes, this is
why have you been talking this whole time?
Yes.
Yes.
Now I'm just gonna add that. Start with mentioning that I do intend to keep as much of the canon as possible, as long as it doesn't violate two important ideas, which are, first, the narrative has to flow. A game is a game, a book is a book, a movie is a movie, an opera is an opera. Things flow differently, which is why when you go see a movie, they say, oh, the book was better. The book wasn't better, the book was different. You cannot expect a movie to flow like a book does, because it's a different thing. The same thing happens when adapting this to stage, a game to stage. So that's the first one. The second one is that you have to eliminate what is actually mechanical, meaning little elements that are made to be obstacles for a player, like learning how to play, or specific masks that have to be worn for specific effects. All those things work in a logic that is a game logic. So it's not only about how the story flows or the elements that you cannot show from a game to the stage, but it's also about how you go about the actual content of the game that can be put on stage. So that's one of the main reasons why Link had definitely to go, because Link is the player. Link is nothing else but the player, and the audience in an opera, is the role that Link would have if in the game the interaction happens between the player and the game, and the player is Link. Then in an opera, the hero, between quote hero unquote, the very
the observer.
Yeah, the observer, exactly. The only interaction you have with an opera is as an observer. So the audience is the observer. The audience is the interaction. So Link, if anything, is the audience, is an observer. There's no interaction whatsoever. They're not. Link is not a participant. And so we go on with what Liam was about to say, which is the medium. What do you have to remove from the medium?
So one of the characteristics of opera, like cinema and Opera, cinema, and literature all have in common that they are linear mediums. The narrative is, generally speaking, the order of events is finite as presented by the author. So not finite; it's fixed. It's not. It can't branch usually in the way that, say, a game does. A game can be non-linear. There's no necessity of linearity. Additionally, unlike a novel, but like cinema, an opera has finite time to express whatever narrative content you have. So, particularly salient for theatrical works is you have to conserve details so that it can be expressed concisely. You can't overload your audience with information because they do not have unlimited time to process it. It can't be some incredibly dense novel that they can spend the better part of 25 years trying to study and understand and discuss. You have 3.5 hours. That's all you have. You may have a little bit of time at interval to discuss things, but essentially it should be readily understood, unless your intent is to be obtuse, which ours is not. Much. Well, unless you're the Happy Mask Salesman, that's its own kettle of fish.
Important thing to note is that this opera is made for everyone, not just people who know Zelda or Majora's Mask specifically. It's supposed to stand as a standalone work, on its own. It's supposed to work by itself. So, of course, there can be small references, what you would call Easter eggs, but those cannot have any prominence whatsoever. In fact, most of them might as well just be visual, which they should be because the sets are supposed to be like the game, just a bit a bit more realistic in a way. But the idea is that we cannot fill the opera with things only the people who play the game understand. So the everything that is not in the flow of the narrative has to go. And I've been straddling the line between a concise storyline and dispersion, because we are very, very close to being very, very to spreading things a bit too much. It's almost like Cafe in Wonderland in a sense that it's a bunch of sequences.
What do you mean almost?
It's a bunch of sequences that, in an opera, each act is a single location. We are already violating that rule. The first act has 2 locations, the second act has 3.
Yes.
And the third has 2, of which the first has 2 subdivisions. So it's
3 subdivisions.
3? No, you have the tower. We can say those things specifically. Just don't have to develop. I want to spoil, but I can obviously. I already said that we were going to see Ikana. In Ikana, you have the tower, you have the castle. Pamela's house doesn't count. It's just there. Well, it doesn't matter. Point being that you have subdivisions of sets and more than one set in an act. That's already a breach of the of the typical opera convention, in which stuff doesn't have to move much, but it does. So, and Cafe goes to 4 corners of the world and all that stuff, and it becomes a sort of for a typical opera audience, it's a bit of a long ride, because you are constantly exposed to very different situations which have no connection to previous situations. The Deku appear once, they don't come back. The Armani appears once, he doesn't come back. Mikao appears once, he doesn't come back because Mikao dies, of course, like in the game. But the point is that it's a character that goes for almost unexplained reasons to a normal opera viewer, to completely different places. So that's already a very, very close approach to the game, in the sense that Link would be doing that sort of traveling, just not as just Cafe doesn't do it as extensively as Link does. And this was a choice I made because the alternate choice would be having Cafe stick as much as he could to his path in the game, meaning he would only leave Clocktown on the 3rd day to the valley. And that would allow me to develop on further citizens of Clocktown that I don't develop in this version, and it would allow me to show Romani Ranch, which I do not show in this version. Basically, Romani Ranch would be the final straw that would just make the whole opera a bunch of. It would disperse it too much. There's no point for Cafe to go to Romani Ranch, and yes, I'm aware of the connection between Anju and Crimea and all that stuff, but doing the math with all the other places in Termina, it just it was the excessive detail that had no bearing whatsoever. Another version of the opera would stick better to canon, but that would imply you would never see the Deku, you would never see Darmani, you would never see the Zora, you wouldn't see most of the things that we will see in this one. So I prefer to show a bit more of Termina and change canon a bit more than just make more or less more linear thing that would be more operatic, but a bit more poor in terms of adapting the world of Termina to stage.
Understandable. Yeah, it's definitely better to have it be something that's more, like you said, put the media form first.
Yeah.
You know, the story, all that stuff. But so how are you handling those challenges exactly?
With a headache.
2 headaches.
2 headaches. Well, 3 actually. Well, no, Miguel is more on the engraving side, but he
has headaches of his own.
Yes, he has headaches of his own, which is passing on to us now. How am I? What do you mean? How exactly am I handling? Can you develop a bit more?
Like you say that you have 2, 3 different locations and all that stuff. It sounds more like going to like a Disney World ride, where you should be like on a cart and then you're driven to all these different scenes and scenarios and all that stuff. But to handle all these set pieces, to handle all these different elements of the story where he's going all the different places, and you said it's already getting kind of stretched a bit.
Yeah, well,
how are you able to handle all of these things together, and then how are you going to bring that stretched aspect of things closer back so you're not running so thin? That's multiple questions in one, I realize.
Like how do we internally justify the fact that he's effectively on a all stops ride around Termina?
Well, the first idea, how do I explain this? There's 2 things. First, there's a physicality of the sets, because I'm personally I dislike stage works in which most things are projected. Sadly, I might not have control over that completely, but I do intend to design a basic notion of how one could actually do this with physical sets, which I do intend. Actually, the latest Q&A has been asking for concept artists to come help us, because I do intend to sketch out, to have properly sketched out ideas for sets, how they would move and how they would be, how they would interlock and how they would change according to the progression of the story. We spent like a week talking about sets, me and Liam. It is possible to do it physical sets, which is what I'm very happy with. The other thing is what you said about justifying Cafe's movement around Termina. Well, it's with a very slight change in the plot, in the canon, which is, if Cafe does not know the Curiosity Shop owner, who incidentally is not a soloist, just part of the Clocktown Choir, unrelated to Cafe, he does not know where Sakon is, or even if he comes to town to sell his wares. What this allowed me to do is, following the little lead that the Juggling Brothers give Link when we talk to them in East Clocktown. They say that they make a stupid joke about the kidnapping in the swamp, but then the kid woke up. That stupid thing. And considering that Cafe has been looking for his mask for a month, he knows what's overhead. He knows what's going on. He would be quite in a state of despair. So any lead of any sort of criminal activity would be a lead. It would be something valuable to search for, because he can't find Sakon at all. So that was the first step that I made to make him leave Clocktown. He goes to the swamps to look for some sort of lead about Sakon. And then it just flows from there. It flows from the idea that Cafe... Oh, actually, I did say this already, actually. I could say it.
You may have done.
I said a lot of things about Act 1. We can say what we changed, actually. No, I don't want to say that. No. Spoilers! No spoilers for you!
Oh, not today.
No. What I want to say is that he does meet Sakon.
Yes, he does.
In the robbery. You know when Sakon steals from the old lady at midnight?
Yes.
Okay, North Clocktown. That's his lead to try and follow Sakon. That's his little bit of encouragement. Haha, I haven't seen him in a month, but now here he is, and he left out the north exit and all that stuff, and that leads him to that leads him to Snowhead actually, and which is why then there's Cafe's Dream, which you know, which is on it's an instrumental on YouTube. That dream leads him to Great Bay. That's the flimsiest lead of them all. But the point is,
he's desperate.
Yeah, he's desperate, and it's almost like a spiral of madness in the sense that, you know, the end is coming, you know, everything is falling apart, and anything you can possibly think of. I haven't searched there. Maybe he'll be there.
Cafe literally spends the short amount of time he has remaining to him to literally scour all the four corners of Termina.
Almost, but yes. But the point remains that the way we dealt with it is extremely delicately, because giving a character a lead out of absolutely nowhere for no reason is obviously silly. But we have working for our advantage the fact that people who don't know the game can just consider the idea that, you know, he heard of a lead about a criminal, his mask was stolen, so he can just go on to the swamps because the juggling brothers said there was a kidnapping. And there is a line that is repeated along those that time, which is criminals know criminals, which is Cafe's logic in his mind, you know, of explaining that, okay, maybe if it's not Sakon, I might get close to some sort of criminal activity that will connect me to him. So that's where Cafe's bravery shines through, basically. He's not afraid of getting into a troublesome situation if it means he'll get the mask back. Which also paints him as a sort of a fool. I try to balance those two things. He's pathetic in the sense that he has no idea what he's getting into. He's brave because he'll do everything to get the mask he promised Andrew. So it's that balance, basically, that people would just judge in their own ways. I've shown the first act and the second act to people, friends of mine, who've been around, and some of them say Cafe is an idiot, and others say, yeah, well, yes, but there's a brave idiot. No, Cafe is an idiot.
He's foolhardy.
Yes, foolhardy, exactly. Some people say he's an idiot, and some people say he's brave. So you know, it's cool to create that sort of dichotomy. Dichotomy.
That's actually pretty cool. The idea that some people can interpret it differently.
Lasvegas spells Vegas, a town where you are sure to have a ball. A city that's as cool as it is hot. That's Vegas. Place a bet and you can win it all. Lasvegas spells Vegas, a place where you can party all night long.